Great. Hello. I'm Michael Tobalski, Vice President of Member Development at WEConnect International, a global network that connects women-owned businesses to qualified buyers in over 110 countries around the world. Welcome to today's webinar, the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Business Case for Global Inclusive Sourcing from Women-Owned Businesses. Thank you for joining us for what promises to be an engaging and insightful panel discussion, sharing best practices and guidance on connecting the global supply diversity and inclusion business case to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We would like to thank Continental AG as a sponsor of today's session. For today's webinar, Brittany and our team will be handling the logistics. If you have questions you would like the panel to address, please type them in the chat box in Zoom. This session is being recorded and will be available afterwards. And now I would like to introduce you to Elizabeth Vasquez, CEO and co-founder of WEConnect International, and today's panel moderator. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Michael. I'm just thrilled with what we have organized. This is a really important conversation on the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the business case for global inclusive sourcing from women-owned businesses. And I couldn't be more thrilled to get to spend the next hour with some real rock stars in the space of inclusion. Jamila Balabidi, the Purchases Director for Global Women Economic Empowerment and Global Innovation at Procter Gamble, will be one of our featured speakers, along with Javette Hines, Global Head Supply Chain Development, Inclusion and Sustainability at Citi Group, and of course, Meg Stowe, who is Strategic Sourcing Director and International Supplier Diversity Manager at Intel. And if there were a rock star panel for inclusion, this would be it. These leaders are incredibly passionate about this issue and are going to help all of us understand the linkage between supplier diversity and inclusion and all of us achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it is obviously SDG 5 with inclusion, but really many of the SDGs are going to be touched by the work that these folks are doing. So let me just start with some questions. We do have some Q&A, so we want all of you joining us here today to be thinking about your questions. I have a ton, but we're going to leave some time at the end. But let me just start maybe with Jamila. Tell us about your supplier diversity and inclusion efforts and when you began working on global inclusive sourcing.
Okay, well, first of all, hi everyone. I'm very thrilled to be with you today. But back to your question, at P&G first, I would say innovation and marketing are part of our DNA every day. And so is supply diversity. Okay, so supply diversity has been a business strategy for P&G since the 70s. It did start as a purchases-led program, and to help grow and help develop diverse suppliers in the United States. And because we know this is good business, right, helping us drive value for our shareholders, but also drive value in communities we serve through job growth and economic inclusion, right? We have made it a business strategy. So in US, it is a pretty mature program with more than $2.2 billion spent per year and making it one of the largest in the country. But even though it is well established, we do have a huge ambition to grow it even further, and not only in US, right? Because of our geographical span, we have operations on the ground in more than 70 countries. We are selling in more than 180 markets. So it is an obvious thing to think about this program globally. And back in 2015, we made the decision to globalize it. So while, again, this program is a global initiative, we decided to build it with a focused approach for each region, recognizing the fact that every region advances in a different way, a different pace. So there are different dynamics, different maturity level. So we wanted to make it global, but at the same time, specific to the different region. So today we have a buyer, wherever we have a buyer, we have a supply diversity program around the world, okay? But the last thing that I would like to share is every buyer or every team or every region, every country will have most likely a slightly different focus. So for example, when we have an industry that is very concentrated and consolidated, probably the focus will be on tier 2. But then whenever we have a very, I would say, competitive industry with a lot of partners available, we will definitely focus on tier 1. And this is particularly true for the service industry, for example, where we are actively working with WEConnect to help us, get on more of those underserved companies within our supply chain.
Fantastic, Jamila. Thank you. Javette, we're dying to hear what about you?
Oh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for having me participate this morning and for Citi to be represented. Our supplier diversity program started similar to Jamila's 1977. So when we think about supplier diversity, the concept itself is not new, but it may be new to some suppliers who are just thinking about getting started. So, I want to share that, it is not, we're all in this together. So it's nothing that's insurmountable is the point. So for us, starting in 1977, we are housed, so to speak, within what's now called Resource Management Organization, but essentially it's the supply chain. That's where supplier diversity resides. And then with respect to how it extends, we have a supplier diversity team, but of course we try to align across the firm more and more. That has become increasingly important because in order to drive systemic change in supplier diversity so that we can increase opportunities for women-owned businesses, we have to all begin to align with our business units as well. It cannot just be within the procurement or the supply chain. So over the past 5 years or more, we've made a concerted effort to do just that. And also similar to what was mentioned before, when it comes to globalization, and from a global perspective, I'll say we've probably only been at this maybe about 5 or 6 concentrated years, right? But the key thing for us there is to make sure that, again, we can't just plop a US program into another region or country. So we've taken concerted efforts to make sure that as we consider diversity and inclusion in our regions, that we understand the country laws, that we understand the subtle nuances that do impact women-owned businesses in particular as it relates to here, and that from a sourcing perspective, that the sourcing team feels that it can come up with its strategy that makes sense about what its needs are, what the business needs are. And then a final point for us is making sure that we also align with the country heads, the region heads of those countries, so that they understand supplier diversity, its alignment with workforce diversity, community engagement, and how all of those things tie together. In addition to that, working with our global public affairs team across the region. So that's kind of how we started, and that's kind of how we keep things going from an alignment perspective within Citi.
Fascinating, Javette. Really how you link all that together. Meg?
So we had a supplier diversity program in place in the US since about 1998. So 22 years, but we only started internationally in 2010. And I always remember that because it was just after I came back from maternity leave from having my second child, and he has just turned 10, so it had to be 2010. So we believed at the time that we were doing it well in the US, so why not do it internationally? What's good in the US should be good internationally, and it should all be inclusive globally, right? So in 2015 is where we really put a stake in the ground, where our then CEO made an announcement that we were going to spend $1 billion with diverse suppliers globally. And at the time, we were only at 149 million. So it was a huge gap, but very excited to say that we hit that goal a year early last year. And we are now looking to our 2030 goals. With those goals, we're looking at $2 billion spend, but we've got 3 sub goals of that. So we've got, for women-owned business, we want to hit 500 million spend outside the US by 2025 with women. We've got US Black-owned businesses at 250 million by 2023, and minority 500 million globally by 2023 as well. We are in 24 countries. I want to say officially, but we're all over the place, but 24 countries where we've got great leads, country leads, and commodity leads that help drive it in those countries. And they are phenomenal. Without them, we wouldn't have a program. They're just so passionate. We've also we've got a very, very strong tier 2 program globally, where we ask all of our prime suppliers to report their tier 2s. And on top of that, it's part of our procurement operations. So it's in our terms and conditions, it's in our RFPs, it's in our scorecards. So overall, a big program around the world.
That is so interesting. All of you have really fascinating models for how you get buy-in across the organization. So I'm really curious, maybe again, starting with you, Jamila, what area of the organization does supplier diversity and inclusion report up to?
Yeah, well, as said earlier, supply diversity sits within purchases as a program, but it is part of a much bigger scope, which is our citizenship program. And what it tells us is what it does, it is built in every one of our business strategies as a result. So citizenship is a component of every business unit strategies, and so does supplier diversity. So the citizenship program is sponsored and led by our executive. So what it does also tell us, it is not an aside program. Again, it is built in the business strategies, and as a result, it is also reporting to ultimately to our CEO and our executives. So just to also share another insight is, we have a board for citizenship, and in that board we have our CEO, we have all our business unit CEOs and our global functional leaders, and they're all talking, not only all the programs we do under the citizenship program, but also supplier diversity, and they're all committed and all engaged to really to the success finally of this program. So at the end, net, to answer your question, it sits within purchases, it is owned by purchases and driven by purchases, but at the end, it also reports to the very top of the company.
Really interesting. Javed, is that similar or different for you at Citi?
Similar, and I think I would say that we're still evolving with respect to the full business alignment, right? We are as a part of the purchasing organization, and currently every year I actually report to the board of directors for Citi our supplier diversity efforts, as well as our sustainability efforts. So that has been, I've been at Citi 12 years, so that's been consistent for me. And that's been a plus to have the board of directors actually have as a part of its remit supplier diversity. And that's particularly a part of the nomination, governance, and public affairs committee of the Citi board. And I think this past year, we have the additional opportunity now when it comes to scorecarding and really evaluating and validating, as an example, some of those metrics that Meg mentioned as a part of a scorecard that's been proposed. Unfortunately, we had a lot of civic and social unrest in the US this year during the summer, especially. But what that also then led to was, additional focus on supplier diversity, on diversity and inclusion, on efforts from a global perspective. And so as a result of that, that did allow for what I'll say more what Jamila just shared, that greater alignment where your business leaders, where everyone is coming together to figure out how can we truly all be in this together from an accountability perspective. And when we talk about trying to get to $1 billion in spend or an increased spend amount with women and or Black owned businesses, how can we each make sure that we have a piece of the pie here and accountability to take this to the next level? So that's, I think, what has come out of some of the challenges from this summer have also led to opportunities that have made us all more focused and accountable in, one, looking at metrics for numbers, but also being more intentional about opportunities for real inclusion that ultimately will get you to the numbers.
I love your focus on measurement. I know all of you, that's a really key pillar of what you do. You don't just talk about it, you actually measure it and report, especially with board engagement. That's fantastic. Meg, is it similar for you, different?
It's very similar. And as you say, measurement is key, right? Because when you don't measure something, you never achieve it, right? So we sit in procurement. Supply diversity is driven by procurement, and it reports up through procurement to our CEO. We've got C-level engagement and ratification, as well as it sits in four of our diversity and it's one of our 5 diversity and inclusion pillars. So, we've got workforce diversity, we've got Intel Capital that looks after the capital side, where we're trying to bring in diverse businesses, and we are one of those pillars. It is part of our overall corporate CSR report. We're in our CSR report. We've been in there for many years, and that goes up to the board, obviously, and it also goes up to the CEO, and it's public. So we are we're trying to be very transparent in all our measurements. And again, it's driven out of procurement, but it's owned by the whole company.
So Meg, maybe staying with you for a moment, I have a question for all of you, but which of the UN SDGs does your organization currently support, and how did the Sustainable Development Goals support initially begin?
So it's really interesting, and I was working with the CSR team, and we're in a number of them, right? So I can list the numbers off, but we're probably in about 6 or 7 that we support. And the UN SDGs make up part of the elements of our RISE goals, our 2030 RISE goals. And RISE stands for Responsible, Inclusive, Sustainable, Enabling. So those are where we're moving. And everything to do with CSR is under those goals. So some of them are industry goals, some of them are business goals, some of them are operational goals, but they're very, very broad and very ambitious, I'd say. They're going to be hard to get, and we're not going to be able to get them, some of them, without the support of all of us going at this together, right? So they were part of form part of those elements. We also believe that achievement of the SDGs will be critical to creating a life of dignity and opportunity for everybody on Earth, right? And we believe that technology is going to play a key role in achieving and enabling these goals and implementing through the world. So at this stage, we support, gosh, I would say, do you want me to list off the numbers, or are you okay with about 6?
Whatever you prefer. I know that this is embedded, and that's what's so encouraging about what all of you are doing. Yeah,
and I think, you know, the other thing, Elizabeth, is while we're, you know, some of them are not tied to SD&I, I think they SD&I interconnect. In fact, all the goals interconnect in some way, and SD&I runs through a lot of them, and we're playing in most.
Wow. I love how we're starting to all recognize that we have to do well on all these things, and it is possible. You all are doing it. Javette, would love to hear about how you all are doing this work.
Yeah, and I think it's so critical, one, to have this conversation, but more critical even now, right, with everything that's happening in the world. More so than ever, it's so important to think about the Sustainable Development Goals, or the global goals, and what they can really, what can be accomplished if we are all working on these goals together. From a city perspective, when I got to Citi 2008, it was to manage supplier diversity, and then immediately sustainability was also added. And that was like a gift for me, because I thought, wow, this kind of allows me to grow a program beyond just a conversation about supplier diversity. And so we started then in the space alone for me to talk about sustainability. But at the corporate level, our corporate sustainability team, or now what's called our ESG, Environmental Social Governance team, we're already working with respect to the Equator Principles and a number of other different things, and then becoming signatories eventually to the WEPs, et cetera. So we've been very focused on the global goals for some time now. And in fact, we have this brochure called Banking on 2030, which does illustrate and illuminate about, same as Meg, about 6 specifically from a corporate perspective that we highlight out of the 17. And I think what we highlight probably 5, 8, 9, 11, 13, 7, and one other. The other one that I add on for my benefit also is number 10, because here, certainly when we're talking WEConnect, WeBank, et cetera, number 5, gender equality, hands down, and that's spelled out in Citi's documents. But also for me, when I think we're talking globally about supplier diversity and inclusion, number 10 is important, because now we're talking about the reduction of inequalities. So even when you go to a global space and someone may not like the word supplier diversity or diversity and question the privacy part of what they think you might be asking, they understand inequality. And they understand that we all have a need to reduce inequalities and build and create economic opportunities for people. So that's kind of how we got started. And Banking 2030 is 2030 specifically because at the end of the day, ideally, if we all are working on the global goals, by 2030, right, we would have made a significant difference across the globe. And I think, to Meg's point, that's going to be technology, it's going to be consumer goods, it's going to be financial institutions. It is really going to be all of us working together on those goals, and particularly looking at 17, the partnership goal, to figure out how do we continue to include the SDGs as a part of our day-to-day work. And then how do we work together to make sure we make this a better planet by doing that work and the work that we're currently doing.
I love how you shared it's part of your day-to-day work, and it's urgent. There's urgency. It's not an afterthought that we'll get to the SDGs and those other deliverables when we have time as a nice to have, that it's actually part of the business model, and serving your customers, and being a part of the community that you serve. So that's really encouraging. And you flagged the WEPs, the Women's Empowerment Principles. And I do hope everyone participating on this in this conversation today, you're getting your questions ready, but you're also checking to see if your organization is a signatory to the Women's Empowerment Principles that the UN hosts. And Jamila, I know you've been really involved working with various parts of the UN, especially UN Women, but which of the UN SDGs does your organization support, and how did that start?
Yeah, well, the very quick answers is I'm happy to share that we're supporting all 17 SDGs. But let me also step back and help you understand when this whole thing started. Actually, it started with our founding back in the 1837. and at least we believe we've always been a very good citizen, and we publish the results and the progress, in the citizenship report, like all companies do here on the panel. The 2020 version actually will be very soon coming out, and there you will be able to see how P&G really supports, the wide spectrum of all the topics that are included in the 17 SDGs. So first, easy answer is yes, we support them all. And but our citizenship program focuses on environment sustainability, on equality and inclusion, and on community impact. And what's, from when it was called the Millennium Goals, right, back in the 2000s until now, the 2030 sustainability development goals, we've been working very hard to advance those goals in partnership with governments, with institutions, with NGOs, with communities, to really drive a positive change. But we always do it through the lens of our citizenship program. Okay, so we have our strategy, and then we link every pillar of our strategy against the SDGs, right? And the measurements are inspired, obviously, from the SDGs.
So it's not simple, it's not straightforward. You really have to have a thoughtful, integrated approach with a lot of key stakeholders bought into this. So you have to win hearts and minds internally and externally. Curious to understand, Javette, how do the SDGs tie into gender inclusive sourcing at Citi? And do you have established goals? And if you do, how are they tracked?
So from a sourcing perspective, when we track our goals, we still focus on, talking more supplier diversity language. But then as I create the strategy for our global region heads, then we talk about, okay, now when we're talking about sourcing and we're talking about identifying our goal for women, and when we are talking about, it's just all the things I just said, then we're talking about gender equality. So if we're saying we're trying to increase our numbers in these particular regions, make sure that when you're talking to global public affairs, make sure you're talking to the country leads about gender equality in the SDGs. And talk about number 8, decent work and growth. So that we're, making sure that there's alignment there, and talk about the reduction of inequalities. And then all the other goals that our ESG team is focused on. How we're starting to get more focus on measurements, though, is just, I guess, like even similar to the WEPs, like where it says you need to have a high level person kind of also driving things. So, for several years, we've had one of the top women leaders, working with UN Women, working with others to try to drive it to the next level. So this past year, we have a number of different groups where we've tried to break it out: supplier diversity, vendor diversity, supplier diversity, consumer, right? And then community. And then how do we now track it relative to the SDGs? So now we're getting a little more particular about that, which is helpful to me, because that's not coming from me, it's coming at a higher level. That will help me to kind of like infuse, I don't want to say enforce, infuse energy, understanding and accountability from a sourcing level to really make us think about, now it's not just traditional supplier diversity and saying we're tracking women, tracking minorities, tracking veterans. Now we're looking more specifically to as it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals. The additional part of that also, Elizabeth, is because we have the corporate responsibility questionnaire. What we did this past year, we just relaunched it in September. We changed the name. That will be official going into 2021. But because in the Citizenship report, or what's now also called the ESG report, that name change occurred this year, we relaunched the corporate sustainability strategy and the document, so that one looks more like an ESG framework, but also so we can start to look at the SDGs as well. Now when you're talking about climate change, when you're talking about workplace safety, when you're talking about modern slavery, that's what we tried to do in the relaunch. And now going through also the education and the understanding with our teams about why the CRQ changed, why it's important, and especially why it's important given COVID-19 and civic and social unrest that, yes, occurred in the US, but some of the remnants of that was already also occurring in global organizations. So now it is changing our questionnaires, more alignment across the firm, and then the education and training that's also necessary to make sure everyone understands this in the same way.
Javette, I love your obsessive focus on impact. It's not just doing the work, it's so what? At the end of the day, are we having an impact? So Jamila, I'd love to know, how do the SDGs tie into gender inclusive sourcing for P&G?
Yeah, well, indeed. So if we then add a gender lens, then this program will then be part of our gender equality overall efforts. And let me just shed light on this gender equality overall program. It has three main components. The very first one, I mean, being P&G, being one of the largest advertiser in the world, we obviously are leveraging, our media and advertising voice to tackle gender bias. Okay, and we do this obviously through marketing campaigns. Some are very famous. You may have heard about, Aria Shoulder Load, or, Always Like a Girl. What they do, they actually portray women accurately and authentically. And often there are like those role models that we are so badly lacking. But they also portray men, in a wider set of roles, showing hopefully a more equal world and inspiring. And we are, also our brands are obviously taking, a stand on societal issues, as we've heard earlier. Okay, so this is the first pillar, which is important. The second one is about removing gender biased barriers to education for girls and to economic, opportunities for women. Okay, so through corporate programs like, Always programs, Always being a brand of P&G, or, supply diversity programs, as we are talking. And the very third one is about creating an inclusive, gender equal, work environment inside P&G, but also advocating for the same outside of P&G. And, ultimately, what we strongly believe is those three interventions, right, are complementary and are necessary for a successful gender responsive sourcing on the long term, right? We need to be able to have girls stay in school. We need to be able to show role models. All of those components are absolutely critical. Now, to your question about how does it ties to SDGs, right? The way we look at the SDGs is through the gender lens across all the 17s, but even beyond, right? Through the lens of equality through the 17 SDGs. But as your question is about gender, let me probably shed light on some of the SDGs and how P&G really actively, ties it back to those. Number one is SDG number 4, access to education, right? Access to education for girls is so important. They are the women-owned businesses of the future, the women entrepreneurs of the future. If we are not helping them stay in school, right, remain in school, then our pipeline, at the end, will not be the one that we aspire to drive equality. So this is one, let's say, program that always is leading. They are investing in building schools, in helping girls go through, those period-related barriers that they are facing, and making sure that they stay in school. That's one. SDG 5, we'll not talk about it, it's super obvious. But the next one, as Javed has mentioned, SDG 8, and especially in current context, right? This is really about economic justice. Okay, and offering equal opportunities to all underrepresented groups, be it employment, be it access to markets, as you guys are helping us a lot, right? And this is, end-to-end throughout the whole P&G value chain, be it a woman farmer, right? Be it a woman supplier, be it a woman production director, be it a woman-led startup, or being a woman, be it a woman in the distribution channel of our product. So wherever the woman is, we are looking at making sure that we are offering decent work and economic growth, and of course, equal opportunities. Okay, and the very last one, because I told you earlier that innovation is part of our DNA, we cannot miss, obviously, SDG number 9, which is industry innovation and infrastructure. So, for P&G, it's all about now inclusive innovation, right? It's about also helping those women-led startups get access to the opportunities, pitching to P&G and being offered support, financial and others. But it's also about, making sure that we get more girls in STEM, right, careers. Not only more STEM in STEM studies, but also more girls, in STEM careers, okay? And we have brands, for example, like Olay, that has this ambition to really, and they are investing to make sure that we are achieving parity among, those that are entering STEM study programs, but they also have the ambition to double the number of women in STEM careers. So, and another one is, for example, the Vineta program. It's a partnership with an organization called Vineta, where we are helping women-led startup, be more visible, having access to large corporations like P&G. Okay, so in a nutshell, these are probably the 3 SDGs that I would like to give example of how we tie in, but obviously we are connected through a gender lens to all of them. And as I think Javed said, all of them are important to gender responsive sourcing.
Jamila, thank you for taking the time to share very specific, very concrete examples of the different goals tied to different lines of business and all of it tied together. Meg, I'm curious, Intel being, a major industry player, how do the SDGs tie into gender inclusive sourcing at a huge tech company? And do you have goals? How are they tracked?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, it's part of our RISE goals, our RISE platform of 2030 goals, 2030 strategies and goals. So they tied in many ways, and from a gender inclusive sourcing, which is really where I'm going to focus, versus workforce diversity, although I have to agree with Jamila on access to education is so key, because they are the next generation of innovators. We really play a big role in STEM, and I think that is key. But as far as gender inclusive sourcing is concerned, if we look at gender equality number 5, right? So just by bringing in those women-owned businesses who we would never have known of before, and giving them the opportunity to respond to an RFP and become part of our supply chain, or even just get exposure, and then we can help develop them, that is helping create gender equality in the supply chain and bring it to the forefront. I think the other one is number 10, which is reducing inequality, which is pretty much the same, is really, again, you're bringing them to the table, not just in the US, but all over the world, right? It's everywhere we have to bring them. And that will help reduce the inequality in the world, which then will lead us to, if you look at number 1, where no poverty in the world, by giving SD&I and giving women-owned businesses a chance, and giving them a chance at the RFP and becoming part of our supply chain, we driving spends. This is real money that we are driving down the supply chain and into those communities. And providing jobs. So which kind of ties into number 8, which is decent work and economic growth. So as I said, they all tie together really, right? And there, if you've got the supply chain and you're pushing down into tier 2 and you're pushing it down, the goodness down into your supply chain and gender equality down in the supply chain, you're creating jobs in those communities because they need to employ more people. So that is how it really ties to gender inclusive sourcing. We do have measurements. We have a number of different goals which we track, and we publish those every year in our CSR report. So we're at year number 1 of the 10, so we're getting there. But that is how I would say the SDGs tie into gender inclusive sourcing.
I love it. And it's fascinating to me how you can be such a huge tech company focused on getting as much money into the hands of the communities that are significantly underutilized in our world and who desperately need just an equal opportunity to compete so that they can deliver innovations that we all need and they can deliver jobs that we all need. So I really love the way you think about this and the way your business does this work. Javette, you had something you wanted to share.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because I don't want to get away, we all talked about kind of how we're starting to look at this. But again, going back to the part about it not being insurmountable, and it's about a partnership and the ways that you can do it. I mentioned that we have someone that's going to take a look now at women across the board and what we're doing in the different regions in the countries to create alignment. And so I just implore everyone, first of all, to take a look at the SDGs so that it's very clear and all the different targets underneath them. And then you have to figure out which one works for you and for your firm, but then take a look perhaps and identify what you're already doing that might align to an SDG that you just haven't thought about it in that way. So I just want to make that point.
That's a great point. You all should be getting, all of us should be getting credit for the work we're doing, and we don't really realize the impact it has on achieving the SDGs, which is a truly collective effort. Public, private, civil society, the people, society itself. So thanks for that reminder, Javette. And maybe I'll shoot it back to you really quick because I have a few more questions. We have about 5 minutes before we want to turn it over because we have really good questions coming in through the chat. But Javette, which part of the corporation owns or manages the SDG effort? We now know where supplier diversity and inclusion sits, but what about ownership of SDG? How does that work?
In the corporate sustainability, ESG, I keep saying the name has changed. So the environmental social governance team, essentially, they set the sustainable progress strategy. And so the sustainable progress strategy then filters out, it's like the umbrella that then touches supplier diversity, corporate realty services, environmental social risk management, all of those different areas. So it's our environmental social governance team, formerly the corporate sustainability team, and they are part of global public affairs.
Interesting how that has broadened to be more inclusive of the various elements of being just a great company, right? ESG. So Meg, is that similar or different over at Intel?
It's very similar. It's, our corporate social responsibility team oversees everything, makes sure that, the different departments roll up and keep us on track to make sure we are achieving those goals and the strategies, our RISE strategy. But it's owned by many different areas, right? Depending on which goal you're looking at, whether it's environmental responsibility or supply chain responsibility or social impact. So they're all owned by different areas, but the CSR team really pulls it all together for us. Okay, and Jamila?
Well, I'd like to say that at P&G, everybody owns it. So it's every P&G'er. There is a, very, very strong sense of, passion and ownership for citizenship program and very strong employee engagement, be it on sustainability side or social impact. So it's really, really, everybody owns it, feels strong sense of ownership and manages it. But if we were to look for an owner, like an approver, obviously it comes back to the business units. So every brand, every organization unit, right, will have this famous citizenship program, right, that captures both the environment sustainability component as well as the social impact component, and then make them ties to the different SDGs. So And every program, every, let's say, OU program will look different because it builds obviously on the brand equity and looks at, genuine and authentic interventions. And all of that ultimately is owned by the CEO, by the owner of that organizational unit. So the way it works, it's really, at OU level.
Got it. So we have 10 questions lined up already. So I really do want to get to those questions, but in 1 minute or less, can each of you tell me what recommendations do you have for corporations looking to begin to enhance their global supplier diversity and inclusion business case by supporting the UN's SDGs? Jamila, maybe quick hit from you.
Yeah, well, indeed. So I would say first, if you don't have any program yet in place, look at the SDGs, all of them. They all offer a very comprehensive framework, right? And, anyone should start there if nothing else is available already in the company. And the second advice is make sure that you integrate it into your business strategy since the beginning. Let not have it like as a side project, a side team. Ideally, make it everyone's responsibility. This is how you will get moving rather fast, obviously, if it's possible. But I would say, if given the conversation is focused on gender, the next one, and you mentioned it very well, Elizabeth, is to look at the WEPs, the Women Empowerment Principles against the SDG number 5, and actually across all SDGs. What we've seen is it's a pretty good, inspiring, and well-structured scorecard that you can, look at and, develop from there your own program. So, and as we talked earlier, especially in current context of COVID, having ethnic minorities and women being disproportionately affected, for us, SDG 8 and SDG 10 have been pretty core focus as well.
Great tips. Thank you, Jamila. Javette?
I have to echo that because, again, for us, it's especially in this context, 5, 8, and 10 are critical. And those are the things that I've been honing in with respect to our sourcing team, in addition to the broader corporate goals. And I would suggest for anyone who hasn't started, or you're just starting a supplier diversity program globally, starting with the SDGs is phenomenal. Looking again at the targets to make sure something makes sense for you, but I assure you there will be some alignment there. And that also helps, so you're not just talking about spend from the very beginning. You are talking about the reduction of inequalities for sure, and economic impact, and you're really looking at things from a gender lens in terms of what's important. And then ultimately you get to the data about the numbers, but you at least look at those targets to figure out what kind of information do you have about how you're working with women, either internal to the corporation or external in terms of how you want to do business, and then start to track based on that information and then opportunities that can be created.
Great tips as always, Javette. Thank you. Meg?
So I echo what both Javette and Jamila have said, the 2 J's. And I think, 5, 8, and 10 are key in gender inclusive sourcing. I think the other thing is, when you're starting out, and Javette mentioned this earlier, is look at what you're doing already, because they can a lot of stuff can probably map into the SDGs that you are doing already. So make sure that you take into account what you are doing, because that will help you get a little bit further down the path than just starting from scratch. I think the other thing is, if you're just starting out in supply diversity, again, see who you're already doing business with, right? Who's in your supply chain already? You'll probably be doing business with a women-owned business that you had no idea was a women-owned business, right? So, and that's all over the world. And then, remember, again, you're not just looking at it, to Javette's point, you're not just looking at it as this is money spent by the corporation, but that money is going further down the chain into the community and helping those communities grow and develop. So I think that is key. It's what I love about my job is it gives me the opportunity and the platform to go and do good in communities, which I would never have dreamt I could do in procurement in Intel. Right? So I think that's really cool.
You all inspire me so much. The fact that you so love your jobs and enjoy having an impact while, representing some of the biggest corporations, the leaders in your industries. I just am in awe, and I'm grateful that I get to work with each of you. So thank you to Meg and to Javed and to Jamila. And now I get to turn it over to some other really passionate, wonderful colleagues. I'm not sure if it's Michael or Brittany, but either one, we're in really good hands. I know we have a lot of questions, so thanks in advance to all the participants for actively engaging in the conversation. Michael?
Great, thank you all. And Brittany, do you want to go ahead with the questions?
Yes, so I will go ahead and kick off the questions. Like Elizabeth said, we've had quite a few great questions come in. So what I will do is I'll read the questions, and whichever of you panelists want to jump in and answer it, we'll just do it that way, okay? So the first question we have is, what type of measurements do you use? Is there a specific software platform or application for this?
I wish there was a platform for it, but it's called an Excel spreadsheet. I don't know about Citi and P&G. We have a number of different measurements around this. So whether, you know, how many people have been invited to an RFP, we have a rule where you've got to have at least one diverse supplier in every RFP. We have our, you know, I've mentioned some of our goals before. There are a number of different metrics that we would use, and you know, they're always growing and becoming new ways of looking at it. You know, as we look at social and economic impact, those are going to be more new types of metrics that are coming. So they are forever growing, unfortunately, in an Excel spreadsheet for us.
Yeah, I mean, I can go ahead next as for P&G. Measurement, probably the one that is the most known, and the one that we're starting with is obviously spend. But what we're trying to do as well is, in order to fit as well the dynamics in the region, we're looking at probably a broader definition of what supply diversity is. So we're looking at spend with women-owned, and we're so thankful that WEConnect is with us, and we're so much looking to drive WeCommunity to be the platform for people to connect on, for people to meet and exchange and make business, right? And obviously register so we can keep track, right, of who are those women-owned companies that are available, right? So really accelerate the registration level versus today. So that is on the women-owned, but obviously, and we've heard and we talked about the economic impact that goes beyond that. So for example, on women representation, or like equal advancement, equal opportunities within our suppliers or our partners in general. So we are as well starting to shape other measurements, as Meg said, new measurements beyond spend. So it can be like a percentage of women on boards. We're going to ask our supplier, we are already asking actually, what is the percentage of women on your boards, right? Starting with women, but obviously we will expand that to other, you know, groups, okay, LGBT and others. But for now, it's focusing on women. But that's another measure. But there are many more that we're looking at. We've not yet necessarily closed the set of measure. We've not yet fully aligned the whole set of measure, but this is work in progress. And this is where the beauty of having all of us together is we are brainstorming, we are exchanging best practices. Thanks again to WEConnect, helping us connect together, right? And exchanging and learning from each other and advancing.
And I'll say for us, that's one of the things that we have been working on, and I'm going to say the past couple of years, because it seems like such a challenge, right? When you were trying to track and focus on global certificates, right? To make sure there is full alignment. So that then just goes to the spend. But in our regions, I think all of us have said, essentially, we probably have a champion or someone there. So the additional thing that champions have to focus on is, what active engagement do they have in the region? How often are they working with WeConnect? Are they doing business with Citi kinds of events? And then based on those events, how many actual opportunities were also identified by women-owned businesses? So now, and especially again, as I said, with the social and civic unrest that occurred this summer, then we started or announced this racial equity platform in the September timeframe. So I am using that as an opportunity from a global perspective to be more intentional about the additional metrics being actual number of firms included in opportunities. And that is very helpful from a global perspective because it's not immediately starting out to give us big numbers when we're looking at tier one. And tier two for me is always a little touchy when you don't have a tier one program. So for me, it's looking at spend, certainly where we actually have business owners that were doing business with us, but then making sure that there are opportunities that are also a part of the goals and the metrics that we're looking at with respect to our we do business. So those are some of the things that we're starting to track in addition to spend. When the champions meet, that's what we look at on their kind of scorecard. What are the opportunities? How many women have actually been considered? And then how much, spend actually changed year over year, increased, and or did suppliers fall off the mark, right? Are they no longer doing business with us? And then why is what we've gotten to in the past year.
Thank you all so much. And I'm glad that you brought up champions, Javette, because that brings me to the next question. So the next question is, how many staff people are dedicated to your respective supplier diversity programs globally?
So I'm proud to say, and this may be nothing because many people may have many, many more. I've worked for another firm and a lot more people. I currently have 3 people. I have a new person that just joined my team last month, actually. So I have 3 people, one that has been in the past dedicated primarily to supplier diversity, and I was focused on supplier diversity sustainability, but now this person will also be tasked with focusing on sustainability and more supplier diversity because that's the background he comes from, as well as asset managers. And then from a champions perspective, and they do not work directly for me, they work for the sourcing teams, but there's a champion in each region. So in North America, obviously, in Canada, Latin America, Mexico, and then we have champions in Asia Pacific. And so there's someone in Singapore, Indonesia, and Australia with respect to Asia Pacific. And then for EMEA, we have someone in South Africa, someone in Turkey, someone in Nigeria.
Yeah, so we about the same. We have 3 full-time heads. This international supplier diversity manager is only part of my role, so I'm not one of those 3 full-time heads. And then we have the leads in every country. So, we've got one in the UK, but she looks after South Africa, Turkey, here, and Nigeria, and she's originally from South Africa. Then we have somebody in Israel, someone in Ireland, someone in Germany. We've got somebody in Japan, China, India, Singapore, Malaysia, and somebody in 2 people that look after Latin America, one in Mexico, one in Costa Rica. So, but then again, those people don't report into supply diversity. It's part of their role as a procurement manager.
Okay. So very quickly on P&G side, we probably have 3 people in US really supporting the US program. And outside the US, there is no one that is fully dedicated. So I'm probably the one that has the largest focus there. Somehow 50% of my time is focused on supply diversity. But as I said earlier, it's really the responsibility of everyone. So we work a lot with champions. And for example, in Europe, I have a team of 14 champions that I train, that I develop, that I groom, and then I make sure that everyone has a specific responsibility, a specific capability that they help deep dive on and become an expert there. So for a portion of their time, be it 5-10% of their time, they will become like an expert, a resource, an expert for the region. And with those 14 people, we will be able to tackle potentially 14 capabilities or 14 processes or 14, highly important areas where, we need someone to guide us on. So that is the way we work. And of course, we are replying that across the different regions. So net, 3 dedicated resources in US who report to the CPO. And outside, it's really like a system of champions with a matrixed approach.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Okay, so for the next question, I'm just trying to skip through so I can make sure we hit the most important questions. And We will, for any questions that were not answered, we will give them to the panel afterwards and try to answer them in the follow-up that we send. So let's just see. For the next one, I want to go to, no, that won't be here. We go. Is there, for your programs where supply diversity is supported in addition to other social responsibility programs, i.e. forced labor, how do you recommend structuring a global team to support all of the programs?
So when it comes to forced labor, that truly is something that the whole core, everyone's accountable for, because we're talking about hiring practices. So as an example, I mentioned earlier our corporate responsibility questionnaire. And so that questionnaire goes out to everyone. It probably has gone to some of you on the phone, in fact. That questionnaire initially went only to our top tier suppliers. But one of the things the corporate sustainability ESG team pushed for last year was like, no, it really should go to all suppliers, risk tiers 1 through 5. And that's why we did the relaunch, so that it does go to all suppliers, but it does have enhanced questions though. And that's the difference about forced labor, right? So that we can really, again, focus on human rights and modern slavery, et cetera. But that accountability is for everyone within the firm to be cognizant of, because everyone has accountability, and some more specifically of selecting suppliers. But that's why it also has to go to all suppliers who do business with us. And we do get pushback internally because people are saying our suppliers are too small, they don't have time to answer these questions. Well, if they violate some of these things and there's some issues with forced labor, guess who gets in trouble? We do. So if they're big enough to do business with Citi, then they're big enough, every single person, to be able to complete that form. And then we, the whole firm, has to be accountable for those kinds of issues, forced labor, workplace safety, et cetera.
Yeah, I can go next and say like that. If you think of this again, back to the citizenship program, we have carved out what really is related to the supply chain, and we call it Supplier Citizenship program. And under that, you have obviously supplier diversity as a whole, but you also have responsible sourcing, right? So there are two different programs, right, that are led by some people are common to the two programs, some not, right? But they are really like, let's say, populated by those organization units that have the most, I would say, interest or impact on those programs. So this is how I can think of answering your question. So if you're looking at structuring an organization that tackles two, right now they are separate because we want to make sure we penetrate the details of each. They are super complex, and building on Javed's point, especially the responsible sourcing, this is like not a negotiable item, right? Any supplier of ours throughout the whole value chain, they have to make sure they deliver against the exact same standards as P&G, because as you said, Javed, if something was wrong, we are, the target. So there is no negotiation on that point. So we need really like a deep dive on that, and resources that are really expert on that. So for now, for P&G, these are two separate, but obviously reporting to one person.
Well,
Yeah,
unfortunately,
So much for your answer. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Michael. I'm going to tell them that was
unfortunately, we're at time. Thank you all for joining us, Jamila, Javette, Megan, and Elizabeth, for being on the panel. Just for all of those that joined us, we're going to be having this recording available in a few weeks on our website under best practice resources. So I invite you to come back and join us there, and we'll be sending out information about new webinars that we're going to plan for 2021. So thank you all very much for joining us. We unfortunately didn't get to all the questions, but we hope we can answer some of them afterwards via email. So thank you all, and have a great and safe holiday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.